A desperate chef bets her boss that she can turn the worst restaurant into one of the best, in return for her promotion. Luckily, the boss agrees, but little do they both know what they're in for. In the opening scene, we see Chef Emma preparing delicious meals for the customers. On their way to the restaurant are Joe and Manny. Joe is going as Manny's wingman as Manny hopes to find a girlfriend at the restaurant. Joe isn't up for the idea, but Manny asks him not to behave like his regular self but to be more enthusiastic. The situation is tense at the restaurant as well, more specifically, in the kitchen. Emma stays minding her business, chopping some vegetables when her competitor Jack walks in, charming everyone with his French accent. She starts mocking him, but he soon comes to her station. They start going back and forth about French until Emma asks him why he's at the restaurant on his day off. With a smirk, he reveals that the announcement for the executive chef will be later in the afternoon, before wishing her the best of luck. Emma is stressed but decides to prepare herself. Just outside the kitchen, at the bar, Joe and Manny seem to be upset because there's no complimentary nut. But they get even more upset when they find out that the meals aren't cheaper on happy hours. Because the place isn't ideal, Manny starts to panic and suggests they leave. Joe asks him to snap out of it, and even though he hasn't dated in 2 years, he gives him some solid advice. After calming him down and giving him the confidence he needs, Joe suggests they grab beers and go out to the patio. Back in the kitchen, Vivian, the boss, is about to announce the new executive chef. Emma goes to her work best friend to inform her about the promotion just before it's announced. Wishing her the best of luck, she returns to work as Emma heads to the meeting. Unfortunately, they promote Jack as the executive chef as Emma stands with a bright smile thinking that she will be announced. Out on the patio, she sits with Ginny as they rant about Jack's promotion. Ginny knows that Emma's bent over backward for the restaurant and doesn't understand why she didn't get the promotion, suspecting that Jack might be playing dirty. As they're having the discussion, Manny walks to their table holding out his hand to Ginny. Ginny tells him that she's taken but mentions that Emma is single. By that time, Joe joins them as well, assuring them that Manny has a firm handshake. But Ginny informs him that they've already rejected him. Joe takes Manny and they leave in a rather sassy way. Joe gives bad comments about the restaurant. Not letting it slide, Emma informs him that the restaurant has 1 Michelin star. He returns to the table just to check and realize that she's right. Regardless, he continues with the bashing, claiming that he's a chef as well and the food isn't good. They start going back and forth about whether he's a good chef or not before they finally leave. After having lunch, Emma and Ginny head out when Emma spots her boss on the sidewalk. Immediately, she gets an idea to get the promotion and decides to go with it even though Ginny advises her not to. Her boss listens to her but doesn't change her mind. Seeing the rolling dice in her car as the valet pulls up, Emma gets a risky idea. She challenges her boss to a bet that if she can transform the worst restaurant to be top tier with 5 stars, she gets the promotion. If she fails, she will be pulled back to the very beginning. Her boss agrees and warns her about the consequences, but Emma firmly believes that she can do it. The following day, we're taken to Joe's. Inside the messy restaurant is Joe, happier than ever as he mixes and matches a couple of things in a pan. Outside the restaurant on the sidewalk, Emma walks around cluelessly before seeing the restaurant. The restaurant itself is not in great shape, with trash scattered everywhere and everything disorganized. Picking up the pile of bills and letters at the entrance, she walks into a complete mess. The fire alarm goes off and Joe comes out to turn it off. As they lock eyes, they realize that they argued yesterday. Picking up from where they left, they start bickering again until she asks him for a fresh start. Not revealing why she's there, she tells him that she wants some food, so he serves her the lunch he was making for himself, given that there's no menu. Looking at the greasy food in front of her, she hesitates to try it but decides to do so. Her eyes widen as she takes a bite, claiming it's delicious. Asking for the recipe, she is surprised to hear that Joe's father used to run the place. As she finishes the food, she offers to help him with the business, promising to get the place up and running in a short period. Despite being in a lot of debt, Joe rejects her help, assuring her that he doesn't need it. Instead of fighting for it, she accepts his offer and heads out. Out of the restaurant, she starts beating herself up, regretting ever making the bet. Luckily, Joe comes out to tell her that he's changed his mind. Emma jumps for joy as she heads home to get on the task. Back at her apartment, Ginny advises her to take down Jack as well because it'll be easier for her to get to the top. When it comes to him, she volunteers to find everything out. Emma sits beside her as they read about the restaurant and its past. Slowly but surely, they realize that the problem lies in Joe and that is why there are no customers. The following morning, Joe goes to Manny's grocery store to pick up some things so they can start cooking. Manny thinks that it's Faith that has brought him and Emma together, but Joe doesn't think that much of it. Knocking on the door of the restaurant, Emma gets a phone call from Ginny asking whether Jack can fire her. All it takes is Emma to say no before Ginny hangs up to do a bizarre thing. Joe opens the door and they head to the kitchen. In the meantime, Ginny prepares before jumping and snatching the hat from Jack. Her suspicions are confirmed once Jack yells at her in an accent far off from French. Back at Joe's, Emma stares at the kitchen confused while Joe asks her to cheer up. She explains to him that they cannot cook in such a dirty environment, given the pans and boxes all around. After joking for a while, he finally agrees to clean everything up. They get into action immediately, and after scrubbing and mopping, soaping and dusting, the restaurant is left spotless. Instead of cooking, Emma decides to leave because she has to meet up with Ginny. She complains about the operation going nowhere, so Ginny informs her that Jack's accent is fake, claiming that he went full on Al Pacino when she took his hat off. If she can get some proof that he's lying, Emma will surely be taking the spot. The next morning, Joe goes to the supermarket to return the only dragon fruit he took when a pretty girl walks into the store, catching Manny's attention. Joe encourages him to take a chance, but Manny claims that he's way out of her league. As she approaches the cash register, Joe walks off, letting them chat. The pretty girl asks for papayas, and even though Manny is nervous, he manages to pull through and engage in a conversation. Over at Joe's, Emma advises him to go through some rules when it comes to different tastes and flavors. However, Joe claims that he's a visual learner. In the kitchen, Emma decides to prepare a French dish that doesn't require much effort, yet it's a staple in French cuisine. Not only does he not know how to chop greens, but he ends up destroying the tomatoes and making the dish completely different, therefore making her leave. She complains to Ginny, begging her to start sabotaging Jack more so she could end with Joe. Ginny explains how guys are different and advises her to become his friend, or rather his bro, so she can teach him things. Her advice turns into a great idea as Emma decides to take him to a food museum as their next lesson. Although he doesn't want to go at first, she drags him there. He doesn't see a point in going to the museum, but she's sure that he'll learn a lot. Looking at the corn in front of them, she starts telling the history of the varieties of corn. He listens at first, but then he gets lost in her passion for food. While he may not understand it fully, Emma knows it firsthand since she fell in love with cooking through cookbooks and museums. As she's talking about her passion, she gets interrupted by a phone call. Ginny calls, ready to catch Jack in a lie by setting up her phone in her pocket so Emma can also hear him. Getting closer to Jack, Ginny starts provoking him by asking everything about France and where he's from. Unfortunately, he ends up answering all the questions and even catches a glimpse of the phone, which makes Ginny run. Hanging up the call, Emma goes back to Joe, who decides to show her the place where he fell in love with food. Sitting by the shore, Emma expects some delicious seafood when Joe brings her corn dogs. It's funny to her how he brought her to the shore only for them to eat corn dogs, but he asks her to try them. Given that they're Korean corn dogs, Emma is surprised at the flavor and understands why they're his favorite. Joe's father and Joe used to go fishing but would never catch anything, and that's why they would get corn dogs and walk around the beach. Essentially, it became his favorite food not only for the taste but because it reminds him of his father as well. On their way back, she lets him know that he is a fantastic guy with the potential to become a great chef, but he needs to let her help him. Asking him to become a team, she uses some sports terms that she looked up online, and this makes his face light up. Given his good mood, he agrees to be partners, so they set up a new mission for the following day. Same as every morning, Joe visits Manny's market before going to the restaurant. While they're talking about Martha Stewart and her great recipes, the girl Manny has a crush on walks into the store. Manny freezes and becomes red on the spot, not knowing how to react. At that exact moment, Joe gets a text from Emma, letting him know that she's at the restaurant, so he storms out. The girl approaches Manny, letting him know the papaya had been good, but now she needs some vegetables for the dinner she's cooking. He agrees to help her. Running to the restaurant, Joe spots Emma at the front, who informs him he's late. After some cooking in the kitchen, Emma opens up the fish ready to try Joe's dish. As she cuts it up, she finds a whole uncut chive in the fish, which is not acceptable. Looking at his old knife, she lets him know that he'll have to buy a new knife since the one he has doesn't cut well. He refuses, shaking his head. She tries to change his mind and they start arguing, going back and forth. All of a sudden, both of them reach for the knife, but Joe is the one that grabs it first. Having had enough, she lets him have his way as she storms out. Complaining to Ginny, she seems to be very confused about how to go about the situation. Ginny is upset as well, but it's because the recipe isn't coming out as it should be. Grabbing some peanut butter, Emma suggested adding some. Shocked, Ginny reminds her that she never strays from the recipe, and Emma's eyes widen as she realizes that she has developed Joe's habits. Jokingly, Ginny advises her to get to know his family, which is exactly what Emma does. As they're walking down the sidewalk, Emma explains to Joe that in order for them to reach perfection, she needs to know about his personal life. She mentions having dinner with his mother on Sunday, but only then does Joe realize that they're already in front of his house. He tries lying about it not being his house, but Emma can see his name on the letterbox. Before going in, he warns her that his family is a bit too much, but she does not worry. Walking in, his mother greets them first, more excited to see Emma than her son. Right after, she meets his cousin, who is making fun of Joe because Emma is way out of his league. He mentions an embarrassing story of Joe wearing the same sweatpants for 2 months, which is when the stepfather shows up, continuing the story. Having had enough, Joe stops them as he offers to help in the kitchen. While Joe's in the kitchen with his mother, Emma is out with the boys in their beautiful backyard. They show her a game and she thinks it's easy enough. She challenges them to a game, and in the end, Emma is the winner. While doing her victory dance, Joe watches with a smile on his face before calling her to help around in the kitchen. As Emma starts rolling the dough for the pasta, she asks Joe's mother why he's obsessed with the old knife. Unfortunately, it's a sad story. The knife had been from his father, and since his passing it's been even more valuable to Joe. Regardless, the mother assures Emma that Joe would love getting a new knife, as he's still a kid deep down. A ball hit the window, making it shattered. At the moment, Emma gets scared and accidentally drops the dough on the ground. She apologizes, but the mother assures her that they can make a new batch. She adds that in the end, cooking is like love. It can be messy and you'll have to figure it out along the way, but it's beautiful. At dinner, they talk about different childhood stories when Joe and his cousin grab the spoon at the same time. None of them wants to let go, so Emma demands them to do so. Almost immediately, they let go and apologize to her. The mother, impressed, raises her glass and cheers in her name. After dinner, Emma stands on the front porch, looking at the puddle in front of her. Joe brings out 2 root beers for them to enjoy. The pond is where he used to fish, but given that he couldn't catch anything, he would look at stars above instead. Even though most nights, there's nothing to see, he still stays on the porch as it reminds him of his dad. Emma's eyes fill with sadness as she watches him talk about his dad. He notices her and asks whether she's okay. Apologizing, she thanks him for the wonderful night, so he asks about her parents. The reason why she doesn't talk about them is because they are problematic. Nobody would talk to one another, so the only escape she had was the cookbooks she bought. Feeling bad, Joe assures her that she is always welcome in their house with a seat just for her. The following morning, Emma visits the restaurant to talk to the boss. Seeing her at the table, she approaches her with a request. Given that Joe's restaurant is reopening in a week, Emma suggests she brings Joe to their restaurant for her to see who she's competing with. Luckily, the boss agrees. Emma goes to the kitchen to see Ginny, but she seems to be too focused on exposing Jack. Going to him, she apologizes for acting strange before, and for that, she's made a French delicacy, frog legs. Jack almost throws up in his mouth, making it obvious that he's not French. However, he exposes himself by threatening Ginny that she'll see what it's like when a New Yorker gets mad. Back at Joe's, Emma has him try out different spices to check if his senses are in check. Luckily they are, so she reveals that he'll be cooking at the fancy restaurant the following day. In the morning, Joe visits Manny before going to the restaurant. Manny is surprised to see Joe all cleaned up, so he assumes that he's doing it for Emma. Not wanting to talk about his situation, Joe reminds him of the girl who comes often to his store, encouraging him to take a risk, but Manny isn't sure yet. At the restaurant, they stand at the back entrance preparing to get in. After fixing his hair, Emma hands him a present. Joe is surprised to see a sharp knife, so he embraces her in a hug as a thank you. They walk into the kitchen and Joe gets straight to work, focused on his goal. Sometime later, Emma chats with Ginny, who seems to be upset that she can't get evidence against Jack. Emma assures her that it's alright as she's confident that they'll win the bet. Ginny, however, isn't so sure since Joe looks like he's in a sports commercial. Emma decides to talk to him, and as she approaches him, he starts complaining about not being able to do it. Grabbing him by the shoulders, Emma reminds him of his father's legacy and what he stands for. He regains his confidence and returns to making the sauces. As Emma heads out to meet the food critic who will be judging Joe's food at the reopening, Jack decides to provoke Joe. Not only does he tell him that the sauce is separated, but he also talks bad about him in front of everyone. Joe is furious and he doesn't let it slide. Just outside the kitchen, the food critic expresses her concern about Joe, but Emma assures her that he's a great cook. She hears a loud thud, so she decides to check it out. Walking in, she sees Joe and Jack ready to fight as the rest of the cooks cheer them on. Stopping the fight, she orders everyone to go back to work as she drags Joe out of the restaurant. Before she does so, Jack tells Joe that Emma is using him for a bet. It sticks with him, so he asks her once they're outside. Defeated, she admits to it being a bet at the beginning but assures him that nothing was a lie. He doesn't trust her. Opening up about feeling alone, he lets her know that she had been the only light in his life and the restaurant's future, but now he knows that it all has been a lie. Joe leaves and Emma is left with the tears in her eyes, begging him not to go. He goes to Manny's, who seems to be on Emma's side. They all know that Joe has the worst restaurant in the city and she might have used him for that, but Manny assures him that she cares about him. He encourages Joe to go get here, but Joe gives him a reality check. Before he leaves, he tells Manny that he'll be selling the restaurant because he can't take it anymore. Later in the evening, Emma tries calling Joe, but he hangs up on her, making her cry even harder. The following morning, she walks in, defeated, and tells the boss that she has won. As promised, Emma will go back to the basics while Joe gets an even lower score. Emma is heartbroken, but she decides to go back to work regardless. Jack takes the chance to sabotage Emma immediately by yelling at her for making a dish incorrectly. Emma stands in front of the trash can, ready to throw out the dish when she freezes. Ginny asks her to put the dish down, asking what had happened. Emma tells her all about it, so Ginny assures her that people make mistakes. Her words remind her of the words of Joe's mother, so she decides to fight for who she loves. Taking her apron off, she decides to fulfill her dream. On her way out, she meets the boss, who informs her that she's quitting to focus on Joe's restaurant. As she gets there, it seems to be locked, so she searches for the key before she gets in. Walking in, her attention goes to the documents at the bar. Joe plans to sell the restaurant, but Emma is certain she won't let him do it. With a goal in her mind, she enters the kitchen and gets to cooking immediately. Joe arrives at the restaurant as well, and he is not surprised to see her there. He looks for the document, but Emma assures him that she's not going to give it to him. She knows how much she hurt him, but she won't let him sell the restaurant. Apologizing for everything she did to him, she asks for a second chance, but he doesn't believe that people can change that easily. To prove that to him, she grabs the jar of the decade-old pickle and takes a bite. Immediately, she starts choking, so he jumps in to save her life. They laugh it off as the situation fizzles. Joe lets her know that not only has she made him a better chef, but she also made him a better person, and for that, he trusts her completely. The tension can be felt as they stare into each other's eyes, leaning in for a kiss. However, they're interrupted as Joe's family, along with Manny, burst through the door. Since it's opening day, Manny texted Joe's family to come and help. Taking his hand in hers, Emma asks him whether he's ready for a change, so Joe confirms he is. They get to work immediately. Joe and Emma are in the kitchen while the rest of the family organizes the restaurant itself. As his cousin puts up the sign, a large group shows up. Panicking, he flips the sign saying that they're closed and heads to the kitchen. Luckily, Joe and Emma seem calm, so they ask him to be the waiter. He agrees, so they let the people in. Manny is at the door letting guests in when the food critic shows up. He lets her in, and coincidentally the girl from the grocery store is her niece. Finally gathering the courage, he asks for her number and she gives it to him without hesitation. At the table, the food critic complains about there being no menu. Joe's cousin explains that they make their dishes based on people's cravings, which is a concept her niece seems to like. Even though she is not up for the idea, she agrees to try whatever Joe makes her. Terrified, the cousin runs back to the kitchen to let them know that she's here. Taking a deep breath, Joe and Emma decide to serve her the dishes. Although the flavor profiles are different, the food critic takes a couple of bites. They all gather waiting for her response, but she tells them that it will be posted on her site. Given that the girl is friends with Manny, she asks her aunt to give her honest opinion right away. Luckily, the aunt ends up loving the food, so much so that she rates it 5 stars. Everyone jumps in joy, even Joe and Emma, who embrace each other in a hug. He lets her know that he couldn't have done it without her and asks her to become his partner. Instead of answering, she kisses him passionately. Everyone cheers for the new beginnings.